Namaste and hello, Rukus Avenue Radio listeners. This is your Rukus Avenue Radio correspondent, Priyadarshini G. Roy. We are live today in the studio at Dash Radio on Hollywood Boulevard. And today, our special guest is Almanya Narula. She is an award-winning international actor, fight choreographer, dancer, and writer. She started her career in the entertainment industry at a young age, where she was a child actor in various Bollywood films. Previously, she was very involved with the Chicago theater industry, collaborating as an actor and fight choreographer for several acclaimed and award-winning productions. In 2019, she became the first woman of color to be nominated for the Joseph Jefferson Award in Fight Choreography for Gary Cates' Masoor Dion is a Woman. Almanya, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
Feeling great. It is very hot in LA, but we're out here. We're surviving. We're hustling.
We're hustling through the heat, through the sweat, blood, and tears, because this is what entertainment industry is all about, right? We keep the show moving.
We have to keep the show moving. That's right.
Awesome. So tell us about your journey as an actor, fight choreographer, dancer, and writer. That's a huge mouthful to just say, so I'm sure your journey is as astounding.
You know, it's actually been a really random journey. You know, and it's one of those things where, like, you know, I look back and I'm like, how did I end up here? You know, and it's like when you're going through it, when you're going through the motions, it's like, you know, you're always on to the next thing. You're always like, you know, learning and trying new stuff out. But, you know, I mean, a lot of it was like me just stumbling into things, you know, and like when I first started out, I mean, like, my first memory is me being on set. It was me being on a beach, like running across the beach, and someone calling cut, and it was for this like Cadbury eclair commercial when I was living in Mumbai, you know. So I mean, that, you know, had such a huge lasting effect on me. And when that's your first memory, you know, it's right. Like it's kind of hard to move on from that, you know. And apparently what had happened was I was always one of those kids that, like, you know, would talk to anybody, like strangers on the streets. Like my mom was like always worried that, like, talk to the wrong person, you know what I mean?
Trying to keep you safe.
Yeah. But like apparently, like I was getting dinner with my mom, you know, and when we were living in Mumbai at the time, and I guess I ended up sitting on this like producer's lap or something like that, and they were discussing like casting for this commercial, and then they saw me and they were like, hey, you should bring her in, she's like super cute and stuff, and they needed like some
child actors,
and like extras kind of thing. And I guess one thing just ended up leading to another, and like, you know, I did that commercial, and then my mom was like, this is a really cool thing that she could be doing, you know. And at the time I didn't know it was like a career. To me it was just like, oh, when I'm not in school, I get to do this fun thing. Yeah. I have a script, I get to play pretend, you know what I mean? And so I ended up getting an agent or something like that, you know, like a child agent when I was in India, and then I ended up getting onto this other commercial, which is, I think, what blew me up. It was a Rasna commercial. I don't know if you know what it's like, an Indian drink.
Yeah, it's a summertime cooling drink, right?
Yeah.
Non-alcoholic for our listeners, just to clarify.
It would be very
Children
problematic.
can drink this.
But I was like maybe like three and a half, 4 at the time, and the person who was the brand ambassador for Rasna, this was like maybe 1999, was Kapil Dev.
Okay.
Who had just, you know, like was still riding off winning the World Cup, and
right, famous cricketer for all of our Rukus Avenue Radio listeners.
And I played his like daughter or something in that. I actually just found the YouTube commercial the other day. I was freaking out, yeah. But it was like this really cute like thing where I beat him in cricket, and then I was like the face of like Rasna for like a hot second, like on the actual like box.
You were like the brand face for that drink. Wow.
And so I guess like that ended up putting me on the map, and I started scoring these like music videos, like Pyar Ke Geet, Rangila Maratona, like I was like the kid in that. I did stuff with Anupam Kher, you know, and like before I could blow up even further, I remember there was like talk of me being in Raju Chacha or something like that.
Wow. Okay.
And again, these are stories that are bits and pieces that I'm also like still putting together, because like I wasn't like, you know, I wasn't going out and submitting myself, you know, I didn't know.
Life just happened.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to figure out the puzzle pieces as we go along.
Yeah, but I think I had, like, they had changed the shooting dates. And then it would have conflicted with my school, and my mom was like, no. You know, because, like, for her, like, it was never, like, she never wanted me to be, like, a child actor. Like, that, it just happened, you know? And she was very concerned about my education, and I think her theory was like she wanted me to have a chance at life outside of the entertainment industry. You know, I don't think that she thought that it would stick with me this whole time. Like she thought, you know, she probably was like, oh, she'll grow up, be like a doctor. Yeah, you know what I mean? And so we ended up
Get over it.
Yeah, we ended up moving back to Thailand, which is where I was born, and you know, that sort of ended. My years in the Bollywood industry ended as soon as I got onto the plane. And in Thailand, you're not speaking Hindi, you're not really speaking English. The language there is Thai. And I couldn't speak it. I was kind of a fish out of water. And, you know, the industry wasn't the most welcoming to Desis, like at the time. Yeah. And so, you know, like I never pursued acting in that way further, like in terms of the film industry in Thailand. But I still loved to act. And so I was like overly involved in all like the school productions and stuff like that. And then, you know, I mean, I was also like a dancer because I lived in India, and you know, as part of being an actor, you gotta learn how to dance because of the Bollywood
some type
industry.
of classical or Bollywood training is required.
Yeah. And so in that sense, like I came from a movement background. My mom wanted to be she just kind of put me in things, you know, hoping that something would stick. So it was like dancing. She put me in martial arts. Like I did karate, and then when I came to Thailand, I did taekwondo. You know, I was involved with my school a lot. Like I played soccer. I was like in all of the productions and stuff like that. And this was also the time that I was like starting to move away from just Bollywood. Like I was like consuming a lot of American pop culture because I went to an international school. All my teachers were American, and if they were not American, they were like British, you know. Okay. So
very westernized teaching.
Yeah. Okay. Very white. And so I started consuming a lot of pop culture, like, you know, and it was the time where I started watching Star Wars, like Back to the Future. Like Back to the Future was like every day I came home from school, I was watching that movie. It was like my favorite movie at the time. And I was also getting involved with the IB program. It's like AP, but 2 years. And
it's an international form of the AP advanced placement courses we have in America.
And they had IB theater. And that rocked my world because I learned about international theater and the possibilities of theater and how theater has transcended through time and, you know, all of that. And so I was very I started falling in love with theater, you know. But it was just like all of these things and information that I was getting, and, you know, I started imagining myself in things like Back to the Future and stuff like that. But it was like what irritated me was that aside from Alien, there was no like major franchise with like the hero's journey that featured a female lead, you know, let alone an Indian female lead or brown for that matter, you know. And I kind of wanted it. It annoyed me, but it kind of
motivated you.
Yeah, and like became a big part of my mission. Was like one day I'm gonna be like this like crazy.
I'm gonna be that person. I'm gonna be that change that when the little version of me in today's day sees, you know, something on television, then they're gonna wonder, wow, I can be that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, but it was specifically those kinds of films. It was like it was action, but like, you know, fantasy, like otherworldly like things, you know. And so when it came time for college, I still didn't like I think my parents still didn't, you know, believe that I was gonna go into like acting. I think
they thought it was something you were gonna phase out of, or just like an extracurricular thing that feeds your soul.
But I didn't, and I got into this college in Chicago, Columbia College, Chicago, and for me that was like the perfect program. It was like kind of the only place that I applied, and it had like I was able to be a double major. So I was able to do business and theater to appease my parents.
Good. You had a backup plan.
I had a backup plan.
Something to feed your soul.
Yeah. But I was also a double minor, and it was the only institution in the country, I think at the time, now I think there's more places, that had a rigorous focus on this thing called stage combat, which is like learning how to be an actor combatant, like how you know, like fight scenes in theater, or like how to go about them, but in a safe way, you know, creating the illusion of violence and stuff. So obviously people who did come from a martial arts background were able to transfer those skills. People that came from a dance background were able to transfer those skills. And I found, while, you know, initially it was like a little confusing, especially unarmed, because I knew how to do taekwondo, and unarmed, the theory behind it was a little like weird, because I had to pull my punches, you know, instead of actually like following through and actually fighting. I picked it up. What came super easily to me was the sword fighting art within stage combat, and that I will have to credit my dance background. And so those skills transferred, you know, because at the end of the day, like when you're fighting on stage, when you're like fighting on film, you're really just doing choreography. You're really just dancing with your partner.
Right. It's rhythm is a part of it, space, time. Especially for the theatrical performances, it's a little more spacious because it's live and you have more scope. But for a film format where it's limited space or sets, you really have to know your spatial awareness and kind of, just like in dance, mimic those movements in a way that's believable because you're telling a story.
Right.
So whether you're a dancer and you're telling the story of the song or through the choreography, I think the same applies to action and how you're trying to convey what that fight represents. It could be like, for me, when I watched Noah Baumbach's Marriage Story and that epic scene where they had not a physical fight, but that argument and how they choreographed it, it felt really intricate. So I can just only imagine with something of an emotional fight transcends onto cinema, how physical fights convey a story in themselves.
Of course. I mean, you know, there's a level of intimacy involved, you know, and it's like so often you see, and this was like, especially in theater, you see these fights and the audience is just like phasing out because there's no attention paid to the moments. Like, doing a fight is like doing an acting scene. You know, it's no different. Of course, there's danger involved, right? Physical danger, emotional danger, but you're still trying to tell the story, right? Who is the aggressor? Who is like the one receiving it? Who wins at the end? Why are they fighting? You know,
there's a beginning, middle, and end, and there's like a trajectory of a storytelling technique that's required,
right? And when it came to like the sword stuff, you know, it was like I immediately grafted onto it because I grew up with Pirates of the Caribbean, right? I grew up with Star Wars, and so in my head, I was always like walking down the street, imagining myself with a sword. And so then when I got to do it and actually hold it, it just felt really cool, you know. And that was the major part of it. It was just this really cool thing that ended up becoming, like I stumbled my way to it becoming like a professional endeavor, you know. I never necessarily I never like sought it out to be, but the program was so rigorous and I ended up becoming really good, you know, and I just happened to be in a situation where someone needed a choreographer who identified as female, and it was a time in Chicago where there was a lot of like changes being made to the way they cast or the way they were hiring and stuff like that. Inclusivity, yeah. And one thing kind of led into the other, and I will attribute my Bollywood roots to with like the way Bollywood does storytelling is very
grandiose.
Yeah, and larger than life.
Right.
And so I found like while I am very versatile when I choreograph, I found that it was those big like pirate shows or like swashbuckling shows,
larger than life depictions,
like more artistic than realistic. Because you watch Pirates of the Caribbean, none of that's real. None of it's real. It also doesn't make sense, but it looks cool and it's believable, right?
Right.
So I think in a way that is also an art form, right?
Absolutely. I think so it's funny you mention that, because I'm getting my PhD in strategic media, and one of the communication theories that we study is called the transportation theory. So it's when you watch any type of storytelling, whether that's a book, a show, a film, you're transported, forgetting your current circumstances, and you are transported into the narrative of the story. So in the same situation, like whether you're watching a sports match, you see our dads or brothers or whoever is watching that sport, like, oh my God, if I was there, I would have done that. He should have done this, or he should have done that. Same thing applies to like an action sequence. Oh, why do you throw that punch? I would have done this, and I would have done that. Even though we know it's not realistic, like, we would never have that training to be able to like pick up that fight. Or like in a Fast and Furious movie, they're not really going to space in a car. Like you know these things, but you believe it.
Right.
And that's like the art of storytelling, is that you make people believe it because they're transported.
That's such an interesting term. I'm sure you've heard this before too. In like theater or film, like we use the term suspension of disbelief.
Exactly.
Is like this: when you set up the rules of the world, you can basically make the audience believe anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's when you go against the rules or laws that you set up, that's when they start questioning, rather than questioning the character motives, they start questioning
the validity of the premise itself.
Yeah. But similarly, like Pirates established from the get-go that it's there's the theme song and he's jumping from this and that and defying physics, I guess, but you buy it because they've set it up for you.
Right.
So similarly, like with the things that I choreographed, the one that actually ended up getting me nominated for, like, I became the first woman of color was nominated, was one of those where it was extremely stylized, the show, right? And the show, the directors, I worked like intimately with the director to figure out how we can, create this illusion of violence, because the theater was really small.
Okay.
And she wanted to do something really experimental with the piece to make it exciting. And so we had like music, and we had just like sometimes, lighting instead of blood, we used like ribbons,
set design.
So it was a really cool
collaborative effort. I bet.
And to me that was really exciting. To me, that was my dance roots, that was my Bollywood roots, that was everything, like coming together.
Yes.
And creating a piece that like was safe and was fun and it was exciting, and still, the actors were great, so there was still like this level of like
camaraderie.
Yeah, and but the audience believes it because that's the rules.
All of that collaborative effort was put in to sustain that suspension of reality, right?
Yeah. So that was really cool. But fight choreography just became sort of a thing I stumbled into. I love being in the entertainment industry, and I'm an actor first, is what I tell people. All of these other things have helped me develop myself as an actor, and I say Stage Combat was one of the best acting classes that I ever received, because you have to always be present when you're fighting on stage. Like you cannot be, your mind cannot wander, because you're putting
safety.
It's safety. You're putting yourself on the line. You're putting your scene partner on the line. But it taught me how to live in the moment from scene to scene as an actor. You know, you can't, and in theater, it's like this, you see this all the time where actors try to replicate what happened the night before. If they hit a comedic beat, and you just can't.
You can't repeat it. I feel like it's the authenticity of that moment. Coming from my own like acting perspective, I feel like you can try to replicate a scene or a shot or whatever, and it's just that timing, that space, that camaraderie, the energy around you that is very unique. And it's not something that's replicable. You can't just put a stamp on it and like put it onto every single show. And I think that's the beauty of it too. I think that's what keeps artists alive, because you live for that moment where it's like anything goes and the audience feels it, because it's not the emotion of the character or the scene, it's that connection of breaking that fourth wall, and that's what resonates with people.
Yeah, and you know, I find that extremely exciting. I find that extremely thrilling. It's like when you really truly don't know, like aside,
what's gonna happen? Yeah,
like aside from the obvious blocking, and I need to cross the stage right and pick up the glass. You know what I mean? When you truly like let yourself go or give in to being present, it is so transformative. And I think that is what keeps me in this profession, is that there's something truly like spiritual about like taking on a role, and like, you know, you learn so much about yourself when you
live vicariously through others.
So I'm still in it. I still keep thriving to push myself and get better. And you know, I mean, I'm really grateful that every endeavor or any skill that just started out from like, you know, my mom putting me in this class has helped me. You know, I mean, like writing was something that again I found. I happened to have like interned as a journalist in Thailand, and then I got into this program, New Arts Journalism at School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And you know, at the time I was like trying to see if there was a career that I wanted outside of the entertainment industry. So I was a journalist for a bit, and what I realized then was I still just like telling stories. You know what I mean? And my thesis, I wrote a comic book, like a superhero like style comic book, but it was based on a true story. It was based on like this woman who started this thing or codified this technique of intimacy coordination, intimacy direction, which is a new big job in Hollywood right now. And it was like a superhero retelling of like her journey, because she was a superhero to me, you know. But I realized then that I have an affinity for writing. I have an affinity for telling stories. I have an affinity for researching. And
that's very rare in the entertainment industry. Sorry to interrupt, but I feel like having the writer's perspective for women, people of color is very, very important in today's day and age where we're talking about inclusivity, because there's so many writers out there that come from a place of privilege and they write about experiences they've never had. And I think that's problematic. So if you're writing a story about a certain ethnic group or a person of a certain background, their lingo, their stylization, the experiences that have curated the mind frame that they have been raised in can only come from someone who's been in that setting themselves.
Absolutely.
So I've been to auditions, or I've seen a script where it was for a major channel, and it was about the immigration citizenship interview. And the writer clearly had no idea of what the dialogue should be because they've never been through that process.
Right.
And I think one of the dialogues was something along the lines of, why would you like to be a citizen? And the response that was written is to have a passport. So obviously someone who's never been in the immigration process knows that for going through the legal process and procedures, you already have a passport. Right. It's just not an American one, or, you know, et cetera. Yeah. So it becomes problematic, and it shows a lack of diversity in the places of power.
Right.
And writing is such a big power that is overlooked many of the times, because people don't see that hard work of what it takes to rewrite rough notes and drafts and making storyboards and to keep going back and back and back before it ever gets to the development phase of a project. So Sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's really important for people to realize that writing is a critical step in entertainment, regardless of whether it's a comic book, a play, a film, any type of writing is very important.
Yeah, I mean, you make like such a valid point, you know, and it's like writers literally like they create the world, they create the characters, you know, and I mean, it's like one of the things that, you know, I'm discovering as a writer is like you have to allow the character to tell you what to write. It's like this, like it's almost like you cannot control the character once it's on the paper. Yeah, and it'll come to you. But it's like to be able to authentically understand the character too, there needs to be a level of research, because then you're lying, you know.
Exactly.
And that's what I found was like with journalism, with art journalism, like there was a whole bunch of research that I would have to do to write an article, things like that, you know. When as an actor, there was a whole bunch of research that I'd have to do about the characters, like, you know, like the exercises that I've been, you know, put through, like with my training, is like you have to figure out like when did you have your first kiss, like things like you won't even like.
You don't think they're relevant, but
yeah, they are, because they define who you are, you know. Right. And so when you write, if you're paying that much attention to the role as an actor, you also have to do that as a writer. Because, you know, I mean,
it's objective,
right? One, we don't have. It's changing now, and and I feel like we're going through a really cool, like, renaissance. You know, like there's a really cool Desi renaissance happening right now in Hollywood, which I'm really excited about. But it's still not enough. And so if we are going to represent these characters, and if we are going to continue to have white writers represent these characters, then they need to be able to understand and really, really, truly, like, do their research.
But I think my point of argument with that is, could they ever truly understand the immigrant experience of what it means to live in a Western society with Eastern roots? Do they really understand the family dynamics? And I believe the term Bollywood is kind of minimizing that effect that it has on predominant non-Indian countries around the world, because it resonates with the family audiences. You'll see people in the Middle East and Africa, the Caribbean, South America, drift towards Bollywood films because they can connect. And I'm not saying one is better than the other, but I feel like a person without an immigrant background write a story on immigrants just based on observation? And my argument is it's not enough. It will never be enough. And it's not their fault. It's not to demean them. But I feel like the immigrant perspective is so unique. It's so conflicted, even, because you go questioning yourself, you question the society that you're in, and that complexity to be translated into writing cannot happen through observation. It needs to be experienced internally. And I grew up with friends from all over the world. Like, I have, you know, obviously white friends, black friends, all different types of American, Middle Eastern, African friends, and the immigrant experience is so different that only other immigrants will be able to relate. And so I can be in the same room as a person with privilege and power, so say on a writer's table, and my take on a situation or the background of a character, like you mentioned, like when did they have their first kiss? When did they have their first party? Those kind of questions may seem insignificant to a person who has never had to have those questions. Like for Desi girls, for instance, you would see girls growing up wearing one outfit out the house and then changing it up in the car.
Oh yeah, so I did that.
Yeah, we all did that at one point or another, or we just went and faced our parents and like, this is who I am and this is how it's gonna be. So those choices were never topics of consideration for yet conversation for people with that type of privilege. And therefore, it becomes important when it comes to a character's backstory or how they were raised or what circumstances or obstacles they had to overcome to even be in an equitable place. It's not about equality anymore, because you can be in the same place but have very different experiences and backgrounds. So that's my point of argument. I'm not saying I have the answer, but that's just my take on it.
Yeah, and I think, I completely agree. And I think sometimes also there is this phenomena, or there's this like danger, I guess, in like people both being like, okay, well, I can't speak to this person's experience, so I'm not going to talk about it at all. And that can be problematic as well.
Yes.
And I think it's about
being put at the table to listen to each other, I think, is what you're getting at. Like, we have to be open to listening to each other's experiences, but not dictating it. And be like, well, I didn't experience that same incident the way you did because of my perceived background. But I'm willing to listen to how you may have perceived things.
Right. And I think that's a really great start.
Yes.
To trying to create a more equitable industry. I mean, like, I don't think the industry is ever going to nail it. Like, I feel like while we can continue to keep getting better and keep having these conversations, I think there's always going to be room to grow and room to change the way things are operated. But I think that's also exciting because that allows for these different perspectives, because otherwise you're just making the same movie over and over again.
Right, and what's entertainment or human life without growth and scope for that, right? So I would like to talk to you more about your theatrical experience.
Of course.
So speaking about your play, which is inspired by the life of Noor Inayat Khan, an Indian princess turned British World War II spy, Almanya recently developed a solo show based on the aftermaths of Noor's attempted escape from Avenue Foch, the World War II Gestapo headquarters, leading up to her tragic assassination. Noor Inayat Khan, The Forgotten Spy, premiered at the Hollywood Fringe Festival in June 2022 and was met with rave reviews from the audiences and critics. It was nominated for 6 awards, taking home 2 wins. So please speak about Noor Inayat Khan, The Forgotten Spy, and the Hollywood Fringe Festival journey.
Of course. I been so blessed with the show and her journey, and learning about her journey, because I actually, it was another one of those things, stumbled upon her. Like, I was waiting for my mom in Thailand. My mom was a really good school teacher, and I guess she was gonna pick me up from the mall, and I walked into this bookstore, which is like Kinokuniya. It's like the Thai version of Barnes and Noble type of thing. And I was like 10, and I found this book. It was one of, just flipping through pages. It happened to be a World War II book. And we hadn't, at the time, learned about World War II in school. And so my historical context was still a little jaded. But I remembered anytime I saw an Indian name pop up, whether it's like in movies, and whatever, I would get really excited because, I was 10, so this would have been like maybe 2005, 2006. At the time, there still wasn't a lot of good representation for Desis, like...
Little to none,
basically. Harold and Kumar came out, so like that was cool, but like...
It wasn't in the context of being the hero, it was more still were the joke.
Yeah.
And there's a time and place for that. I'm not trying to like demean that. I love that film, but I feel like in the bigger scheme of things, we want it to be front and center for stuff that's meaningful.
Of course. And, the only representation I was getting was Bollywood. Well, it was still like, at the time too, it was like, all the heroes.
Problematic.
Yeah, so problematic, and all the heroes are dudes who are like, middle-aged and kind of creepy. Like, if you really look back at some of these movies, you're like,
you question like the social paradigm that is shown.
Like stalking a girl until she says yes,
until she submits,
and that was considered like cute or like whatever, But so I would get really excited if I read an Indian name or learned an Indian person in history or just like anything Desi, And I was flipping through these pages and I stumbled upon a footnote And it was something to the effect of like Indian princess, World War II spy, and I hadn't, like, I still hadn't registered the name. I think I forgot the name, and I didn't have internet at the time. I wasn't able to just like Google
search her.
And, like there was no like smartphone or anything. And my mom came, put the book away, which she just like that footnote. I couldn't get that footnote out of my head. And years later, I was like 17. This is after we learned about World War II. I once again, during this like Wikipedia rabbit hole, like maybe I was like researching about Dachau, like I don't know. I stumble upon her on Wikipedia, and I'm like, oh my god, this is the footnote, and it was still like it was still like just a it was one of the smaller Wikipedia pages. It didn't have a ton of info, but what I read just was so fascinating to me. And I Google searched her, and there was not a lot of books or anything on her, but every now and then I would just come back. I would come back to her, and every time I Googled her, more and more information started coming out. And I was just like, this story to me is absolutely nuts. And it's crazy to me that we haven't learned about her in our history books. Because what I found out was that she was basically one of the major reasons that D-Day was successful. She was the first, first Indian person, but first woman to be sent out as a radio operator to Nazi France. And I'm like, okay, that's incredible.
Why wasn't she mentioned in history books?
Yeah. And like the life expectancy for a radio operator is 6 weeks during World War II, because the radios, you have to carry this radio set. It's huge. I mean, the radios weren't like tiny at the time. Right. It was like,
you couldn't be inconspicuous.
Right. It was a giant suitcase in which the radio would live in, with like wires that she would have to hang up, and you can get caught doing things like that. But because she was just so driven, when she first joined the movement, the war efforts, they all were just like, oh, she's like an Indian princess. She's too clumsy. She hasn't the foggiest idea what she signed up for. And she's the great granddaughter of Emperor Tipu Sultan. Which is also interesting. Like, he fought the British, and now she's fighting for the British. Which is so interesting. But she also did mention that if she's gonna fight for the British during the war, but after they win the war,
to fight for independence,
she'll fight for independence. Never got to, but and she kind of also signed up. I mean, she had like a Jewish boyfriend, but he was like, they broke up, and he was kind of overbearing. But she got to see just like injustices happening, right? And her father's Inayat Khan, who spread Sufism in the West. And so she was raised with this pacifist mind about doing the right thing. She was a children's book author. She wrote this book called the 20 Jataka Tales, which are these like Buddhist fables, children's book type of thing. It was a really good book to like see like her psyche. You can really understand what she's like sacrifice. Like, she idolized Joan of Arc, she idolized Gandhi.
It was like the Desi version of Anne Frank's diary, right?
I mean, it wasn't a diary so much as it was like just children's books. Okay. But it does
give perspective into her mind frame.
Yeah. So she ends up in Paris. She's like the first woman who's sent out. They sent her out because she was a musician and she spoke fluent French. And because she was a musician, like, she played the veena, she played the harp, she had dexterous fingers, which translated into being a good radio operator because of Morse code. And within 2 days of her arrival, her entire circuit gets betrayed, gets sabotaged. So she's the only one left, And they tell her to come back, but she was like, no, I'm here. I'm on a mission, And it was, to me, this really interesting hero's journey. Like, it like she almost went through damn near the whole like steps of the hero's journey. It's like she joins the war because she's trying to get away from her overburdening Indian uncles. Her father had passed away by that point. Indian uncles again. Right. Was trying to get her married off, and she's just like, ugh. She was
taken care of. Like, that chapter is closed and they can move on.
Yeah, she wanted to go on an adventure, and then she like just stumbles upon greatness because she realizes she's the only person who can do the job. She's the only one left in her circuit in Paris. And she like lasts months, you know, I mean, it's 6 weeks is the life expectancy, but she's there like month after month after month. And the thing is too, like the Gestapo knew about her. They didn't have a face, and she went by a code name. She went by Madeline, was her code name. So like they, you know, that helped, and she kept changing her hair, and you know, but there was like incident upon incident where they almost caught her. Like there was this like one time she was like setting up her wiring in the middle of the street because she wasn't receiving a good signal, and this officer sees her. He's like, "What are you doing?" And she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I know it's like the war, but I wasn't receiving a good signal, and I must listen to some jazz." And then he comes up to her and helps her set up her radio. That's crazy. And then like there's this other time
only a woman would have been able to pull that off.
Right. And there was this other time that like she's at the train station. They tell her to open the suitcase. They see the radio set. Okay, and they're like, "What is this?" And she goes, "Oh, it's a cinematographic apparatus." And they just believe her and leave her.
Again, because she's a woman and she can put a wool over your eyes.
And it was like, you know, it's so funny because all of her superiors were like, she is, you know, I mean, she was beautiful.
Right.
Like they were like, she's not overburdened with brains. She's so ditzy. But I think it was the fact that like she was just so unassuming. That they were just like, oh,
they never suspected her.
Yeah. You know, it's like things that are just like, you think about the Gestapo as this like, they're the know-it-all, and there's, you know,
they can see through you.
The superior race, you know, and then you have this Indian woman just lying to them left and right.
Right.
You know. Anyway, she does eventually get caught, and she still makes several escape attempts, you know, from Avenue Folk. And like, then they, you know, after the third attempted escape, there's no way they could justify not sending her to a concentration camp.
Right.
I think too, like because she was so brave, like the head of the Gestapo, I think, liked her, and he did not want to see her go. He also like, if she's gone to a concentration camp, that's it. You know, that's no way.
There's no coming back.
There's no coming back, and there's no way he could get any more information out of her.
Right.
You know.
Right.
So he tries to get her to sign this document, which is like a declaration of, you know, that she won't escape, but she is so just like brave and adamant, and like I cannot, you know, she could have signed the document, she could have lied, but she
didn't take the easy route.
She didn't take the easy route, and so then that day she gets shipped off, and the rest of her time, this is just only a couple months before the war ends. So she made it so, like she was so close, you know. And the reason she got caught in the first place too was like she'd finally decided to leave Paris and go back to London, but a woman betrayed her because this woman thought her fiance was sleeping with Noor, and she was jealous, and she sold her out to the Gestapo, which is also just a horrible thing, you know. And you see that time and time again, like pitting women against each other. Like they were friends, and she sold her out to the Gestapo. Like that's insane to me, you know. But this story is crazy. So I, you know, when I finally learned about her and read it, I was like, people need to know about it, you know? And there's a level of connection that I felt with her too, because it's like, I feel like I would have found myself in a situation like that. I would have stumbled out. I would have been like, I need to get away from my family. I'm going to join the war, you know? And then I would have realized, oh shit, I'm the only one.
What did I get myself into?
What did I get myself into? But I'm the only one who can help now, you know?
Right.
And so I felt like I connected with her on that level. I saw my mom also in her, like, you know, my mom is this Indian mother who was like built to be like the oldest sister, the mother.
Very responsible.
Yeah, very like, and she was like, you know, timid. She was made to be timid, kind of. And over time, I saw this line come out. And I realized something about my mom was like, my mom was never a shy, timid woman. She was made to be that. And when you're put under a circumstance, like, you never change who you are. I think circumstances
bring that out of you.
Yeah. And with Noor, I think the war really allowed her to be herself. Like, to her, it was exciting being a spy, like being the first woman. You know, like I think she enjoyed being badass. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, it's clear that you've done an insurmountable amount of research for Noor Inayat Khan, and I think that's commendable, because when I was doing film school and I got my MFA in digital cinema, my thesis film was about colonization, but global colonization, and how it's affected multiple continents, let alone countries. And I stumbled across information like the Battle of Dunkirk was actually not an all-white army, and they were left there because they were predominantly from British India.
Right.
And you come across other troops, like the Senegalese troops that fought on behalf of France, who were also left alone. And you see the injustices of people of color who fought for the Allies never being regarded in historical textbooks. And movies, or, you know, you'll see people giving Oscars to people who created famines. If you talk about Winston Churchill, he killed about 5 million people in the Bengal famine, which people don't know about.
Yeah.
And I think that stories like this, artists like you who are bringing Desi culture history on the main forefront stage, such as the Hollywood Fringe Festival, is so critical and so important to be that change that we seek, right?
I think so. I mean, you know, it's one thing to keep talking about wanting to see something, you know, and then actually try to go out, because it's like,
do it.
You know, I mean, part of also why I wrote this, like, so 3 million people of Indian descent, of Desi descent, contributed to war efforts.
And all we got was a plaque or a memorabilia or a monument to that.
And like, you know, at a certain point, especially as a performer in this industry, you kind of get tired of people of waiting for someone to write something for you.
Right.
Like, because it goes back to us saying, like, no one will truly get it.
Yes.
Like, you know, and so this was my way of also, I mean, I really wanted to tell a story, but it was also a way in which I could, like, express myself. You know, a lot of what I wrote, I felt like, you know, it was a fine line between telling people about Noor's journey, but also, when does Noor leave and when does Almanya step in? Because there was parts of me that was like, no, I'm talking about myself here. You know what I mean?
Right.
But it's like, what is writing? It's finding the thing that you connect with most, right? About it, especially with solo shows. All you have is yourself. Yeah. You know, so you have to. People are interested in people. People want to know why you find something fascinating. And I thought the Hollywood Fringe was such an amazing, supportive platform for that, because I had originally developed this show out of my coursework. We had to choose someone in history in my school right now, Stella Adler Art of Acting. Choose someone from history and do like a 15-minute solo show on it. And obviously, you know, I had like we were like they told us come up with 3 different like people that you want to do, and the 3 people was obviously Noor Inayat Khan. I chose Jhansi Ki Rani, who was one of them, and Milka Singh. Okay. And, you know, they were like, Milka Singh can be cool. You play, like, you know, you play a man. Yeah. And then they were like, Jhansi Ki Rani was cool. And, you know, when I started talking about Noor, I had, you know, I think they saw something light up in me. And they were like, you need to do her. Like, what's wrong with you? You know, so.
We've heard about the latter 2, but we haven't heard about the first one.
And so I, you know, at the time I was like going back and forth, because I was like, I want to give it justice, and it's only 15 minutes. And at the time, you know, she was someone that I wanted to turn into a screenplay eventually, you know.
Okay. Larger adaptation.
Yeah, and I was like, how can I capture her essence in 15 minutes? Like, this is impossible. Right. You know, you can't tell someone's story in 15 minutes. But then, the more I read, the more I found that the specific moment in time in her life, which is right after her attempted escape and the document signing moment, was the perfect way to give people a glimpse into her story. Because you are, like, when you have nothing left to lose, right? You are who you are. Like, you will
all the masks fall off.
Yeah. Yes. And to her, it was her, like, imminent death, right? So I found, and to me too, a lot of times so there's some documentaries out there, some good documentaries now that are out there. But when we talk about women in history, right, a lot of the women we talk about are the ones who sacrifice themselves. And then when we talk about their sacrifice, we talk about we talk about it in a way that kind of robs them of their autonomy. Like we're somehow, for some reason, especially with Indian women too, like we're obsessed with these like selfless, like, oh, she never stood a chance, and all the
sacrificial element of it that immortalizes them rather than the choices that they made.
Yeah, and the thing that in the stories that I read about her that people failed to pay attention to was the fact that at every single point, it was her decision. It was her decision to stay in Paris. It was her decision to go to Paris in the first place. They kept telling her, this is dangerous. And she was the one who said, no, I'm going. They kept trying to call her back. She kept staying. She did not sign that letter. She could have signed the letter and lived in the luxury of Avenue. I mean, it was still a prison house, but it was where they kept prisoners of interest. So they treated them better,
right.
Instead of going to a concentration camp. Like at any point until the last second, she had the power to choose. And I wanted to show the audience that this was a decision that she made. And that it wasn't her, like,
succumbing.
Yeah. And so that was a very cool moment for me to learn about and focus the story on. And, once I did it in school, I was like, this is, it was well received, and I was like, I want to like expand it. And I found out about the Hollywood Fringe Festival, which was like right around the corner. This was like in March that I at first workshopped it. And, I looked into it and I was like, this is such a cool way to put yourself out there because it has a community. Like it has a hit. Like the festival has been around, I think, over 10 years. So it has a fan base already. There's a sense of community. People are going to see new work. People want to
discover talent.
Yeah. And so I was like, this would be a really interesting way because it was like the first time I'd produced something on my own. Like I spearheaded things before. Like I've curated magazines and stuff like that. This is the first time I actually produced a show, and so it was getting my feet wet, And the Hollywood Fringe Festival was in June. It lasted, it was the whole month of June. We did 5 performances every weekend. We did 5 performances spread out across the 4 weeks, and we performed every weekend. And originally I just wanted to get her story out there, and I wanted to workshop it and get feedback from the audience and see like, where can I take it? Can I make it a short film? Can I make it a feature film? Can I make it a touring show? Like I just wanted to see it realized. I did not go in expecting for it to blow up in the way it did. And I think that told me something, we sold out every performance, like standing ovations. We 6 nominations, 2 wins, it was amazing. I felt so blessed, but it told me that her story needs to be told. Yeah. And that people want to learn about things that they haven't learned about before. And then people are tired of, like Dunkirk being an all-white cast, like things like that, where people...
I think they had one Sardar in that film. Just one in the truck without any lines. Just to put one person out there and like, we have checked this box. We can tell the production that we did a good job, and we can close this case. Right.
So, people keep forgetting that this history is more than white bread, So I think it was a sign that people really, really want to consume newer stories. And so, it was really, I felt like super blessed that I could have told her story, like at this point, 17 years in the making, I found out about her when I was 10. And so...
It's a circle of life moment.
Yeah, it was so trippy. And then because of the success, we ended up getting an extension that was supposed to run in July, but there was just like a surge in COVID cases, and people were getting it left and right. And so I was like, okay, June was a lot. If we're gonna postpone the show, I need a break, and I need to reconvene, and I need to mentally step away for a hot second. And so we're picking back up in August, and it's three shows in August, the first 3 Fridays of the month, 8 p.m. I'm really excited. This is going to be a little bit of a challenge because it's sort of while it's still associated with the Hollywood Fringe Festival, it's been a month since the festival. It's kind of like an extension of it.
Right.
You know, so I'm really excited to share it with like a different audience, a newer audience.
Yes.
One that's not necessarily part of the Hollywood Fringe community. You know,
it's more of an eclectic group, and it's not the same crowd that you would expect to be regulars.
Yeah. So I'm excited.
That's awesome. Well, what can fans expect from you next?
Well, I'm gonna get through this. This is the extended run of the show, but I am working on a couple screenplays right now, like a boxing, a Rocky meets Bend It Like Beckham type of screenplay.
Wow.
That I'm trying to get out there. Some couple short films I'm writing. A couple web series might be coming out soon. But I think just a lot more writing. I'm going to try and take the show, Noor and Icon, The Forgotten Spy, on tour. There's some talk of it potentially going to Chicago or Atlanta. One of the awards that I won is actually taking me to the Solo Show Fest in LA that happens in March of 2023. So I have a spot there to perform because of the award. But yeah, just keep on going, trying to find new stories to tell, and just keep hustling.
That's awesome. It has been a pleasure speaking with you, Almanya.
You as well.
Please share with the Rukus Ave Radio listeners where we can find you on social media and where we can buy your tickets, and how do we keep in touch?
Of course. So I'm on Instagram, Almanya Narula, or you can follow my show account Instagram, which is noorinayatKhan.soloshow. You can buy tickets at the hollywoodfringe.org site. If you just type in the name of the show, it'll pop up. You can learn more about it on Rukus Avenue website for more details as well.
And you can obviously check into this special episode and listen to the great stories that we tell and her whole journey of how we got to the story of Noor Inayat Khan, as well as Almanya's just journey as an actor and artist, and listen to Rukus Avenue Radio. So keep listening, guys.